I am speaking with our state senator, Bruce Tarr, as I do every week. Hello, Senator. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you, Heather?
I'm good. I'm good. I think that the governor listened to you because last week we talked about your wish for regional collaborations around vaccine distribution. And that's what the governor is talking about this week.
Really pleased to see that we've had some regional collaborations approved. And it is a sign that the governor took input not only from me, but from lots of folks around the state and said that we really need one level below the super sites, like the one that we see in our area in Danvers at the Doubletree Hotel. And I think it's good news for boards of health who have been trained to operate these kind of local efforts, these local collaboratives for the last 2 decades. And now the window is opening up for them to be able to do that. So I am very pleased, Heather. Of course, we're still constrained by the availability of vaccine, and we still need to get much more vaccine. We know the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was approved for an emergency use authorization, and so we should see more vaccine flowing that way. And my next request of the governor is going to be that as we see more, please set aside more for these regional collaboratives so that they can continue to operate, because there is going to be a time when vaccine is much more proliferate and there is much more eligibility in the population to get vaccinated. And so the way that I currently view the situation is we're in a bit of a bottleneck where we don't have as much vaccine as we'd like, and eligibility is still fairly limited in terms of categories. But we are going to get to a point soon where we'll have more vaccine and the need to vaccinate more people. So we need to keep these regional capacities alive to get to that point. And they serve a very important function right now because they help to get to populations that might not be able to make it to a super site. So I consider this to be good progress. We are still very actively discussing the possibility of doing one on Cape Ann. And I wouldn't want to set high expectations yet that we might not be able to meet, but we're having that conversation and we're making good progress on one that's been happening in the lower Merrimack Valley that we hope to be able to continue.
And I think one of the great things about these regional collaborations is you don't actually have to be from the region, right?
That's correct.
To
The-
show up
yeah.
for one of these.
Absolutely. And that's one of the constraints or one of the requirements is that because this is a vaccine that's coming from the federal government, we need to vaccinate everybody in Massachusetts that wants a vaccine. Folks are welcome to come from different places. And I've been visiting some of the sites that have been conducting these kind of vaccination clinics, and they've been running for the most part very smoothly. And we've gotten a lot of words of praise for them from folks that have been calling and writing to us.
Well, I want to ask you probably a sticky question that you can't answer, but I will ask anyway because it's on everyone's mind. How do we feel about vaccinating teachers?
So there's no doubt that teachers need to be vaccinated. The question is where they fall in the sequence of things. And the reason right now that they are not as high as they would like to be is because the risk associated with being in school has not been calculated to be as high as other things. So that being said, it seems to me that they do play an important role. And one of the things that we've been looking at and that I've been looking at is ventilation systems in the schools. And a lot of them are not as modern as they should be. They're somewhat antiquated. And so if you're going to be in that environment, then it does make sense to be vaccinated. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to move them a little bit further along the line. But again, a lot of that will depend on getting more vaccine because absent that, we look at risk categories and folks are vaccinated according to their risk of infection. And right now that hasn't pushed the teachers farther ahead than they would like to be. And I think many of us think they should be.
Hmm. And another difficult conversation that we're having on Cape Ann right now is the issue around the regulations that have just come down protecting the right whales, but it's a tough bit of news for our lobster fishermen.
There's no doubt about it. You know, this is a ban that has been affecting folks on the South Shore for quite some time. And of course, now the rules are extending basically coastwide in Massachusetts. And it's hard to tell anyone that you have to go a period of time without any income. And that's what we're saying to our lobster fishery. So we're all working to try to find ways to mitigate this. Clearly, protecting the right whale is important. There is a lot of momentum behind that effort, and there should be, to protect right whales. But we also can't allow the lobster fishermen to go extinct while we're doing it. And so one of the things that's happening on that front here at the State House and virtually here at the State House is the Coastal Caucus has been meeting about this. And the Coastal Caucus is comprised primarily of legislators that represent coastal communities. I am the Senate chair of it, but it also includes folks that don't have necessarily coastal communities in their district that are concerned about coastal issues. And about 2 weeks ago, we had a presentation from the folks at Division of Marine Fisheries and from the folks at the Mass Lobstermen's Association. And they pointed out some of the challenges that are involved with this closure. So we have filed a series of bills to be able to address some of the concerns that both entities raised. So for instance, one of them is directing the Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development to look at how we might modify the state's unemployment insurance system to accommodate folks that are going to be displaced from their fishery by this closure, so that we can try to help them have some financial stability. And that's a very important bill. And another one that's also important would create a more robust grant program to be able to research gear that protects the right whale. So ropeless gear is the thing that we all think about the most, but there are also breakaway lines and other kinds of things. And what we're trying to do is accelerate the work that Massachusetts is already doing by providing grants to researchers, to fishing families to be able to buy the gear, and folks that want to create a partnership between scientists and those in the fishery. So there's a lot of work to be done here. It can't get done fast enough, but the Coastal Caucus is moving very quickly to be able to try to address some of these things legislatively.
Well, that sounds very progressive. Are we seeing this anywhere else in the country or on the coastline? This kind of uh, addressing these issues with the lobstermen?
There's a lot of research that's being done, and a lot of it is actually being done in the maritime provinces of Canada. So, for instance, Nova Scotia has drawn attention for the work that's being done in that province relative to the ropeless gear. And there's still a long way to go. But for my conversations with folks at NOAA and the folks at Division of Marine Fisheries, they think there's a lot of promise to this gear. And it's really kind of interesting to think about, because one of the systems actually uses almost smartphone technology, so that when the vessel approaches the buoy or approaches where the trap line is, it sends a signal and the buoy gets released to the surface. So that's one version of it.
I knew you were going to say that. That's amazing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good research going on, but the problem is we aren't progressing fast enough. And the gap between having the new gear and needing to protect the right whale is just too big. And we need to close that gap, because we definitely need to support the lobster fishery and the people that are involved in it. And right now, because of these regulations, they're going to be experiencing some very serious hardships.
And they just experienced a very serious hardship with the tariffs, right? That was a blow last year.
No doubt about it. It's been a tough road, particularly when it comes to not only the tariffs, but the pandemic. And so the ability to export to places like China from Cape Ann has been severely limited. And that's something that was helping to take the edge off not being able to go into the European Union. But now we've had both of those things. We're limited ability to go into China, limited ability to go into the European Union, but hopefully we'll be able to make those things better. There's a lot of discussion at the federal level about how to create a more level playing field, particularly with regard to the European Union.
Mm. Well, anything else you want to catch us up with this week?
I would only just point out that it seems like our numbers with regard to the pandemic are moving very quickly in a good direction, with some very steep decreases in the number of folks that are hospitalized and the number of new cases every week. And also, it seems to be a very positive trend with regard to the positivity rate on testing going down. So if there's one story that I think that bears watching coming from Beacon Hill, it's the pace of change with regard to the improvement in the pandemic and the ability to reopen businesses and organizational institutions in Massachusetts.
Mm. Well, I think step two of phase three starts today.
Yes.
And the governor took a little bit of flack for reopening and moving into step four. So, but it sounds like he might be right. What do you think?
Well, it's always hard to say, but the governor is doing what he needs to do to try to minimize economic harm while protecting public health. And based on the numbers that we're seeing right now, it's the right decision to be able to move forward. And what's even more interesting, in my opinion, is right now we're scheduled to actually begin step one of phase four on March 22nd if nothing changes. That is a pretty dramatic rate of change. And so we'll see if we're able to stay on it. But it's like everything with the pandemic, it's a fluid situation, and you have to keep an eye on it from day to day. It's really good to be able to work with you to let people know the many things that are happening, because some of them make it into the press and some don't. And this is a great way to fill in the gaps.
Well, that's really interesting and good news about the right whale situation. And so thanks for that. And thanks for the update on the regional collaborations. And we'll look forward to more.
I look forward to providing it to you. As they say, more news as it becomes available.
There you go. Thank you.